Evening, everybody. So as our little promo on Friday afternoon suggested, so my name is Belinda Chapman. I am the host of the Compassionate Women's Health community. I'm hoping you can all hear me, see me okay. I'm just going to set up Facebook here so that I can also see if you've got any questions or comments coming through, because I think it can be a little bit different when it's coming through live in the background here. So let me just go into the group, and there we go. Okay, so I'm going to, oh yeah, and there's little captions going on there. Beautiful, fantastic. All right, so as I promised, I'm going to share my fertility journey. So I do about a 10-15 minute overview of my story in each of my events, but I've never taken this community within the group through how my story played out and why that led to me starting up this group, starting up Bekinda To Yourself Therapies, and feeling so passionate about giving other women a platform to share their stories. And I've called it her story. It's not, yes, it's my history, but being female, being women's health, I have followed what I've loved seeing in other platforms, and I've called it her story because it's my history. So I'm going to start way back. I was thinking of starting in my teens, but the only thing I would say about that became relevant when I was doing the women's brain book studies was how the language around and the story around menstruation affected my view of it going forward. And unfortunately, in my household, going through on your menstrual cycle was associated with shame, pain, discomfort, inconvenience. So that was the story. And so I wasn't really looking forward to it. And even at school, it was really, no one really shared when they were having their period. You know, it was used as a bit of an excuse not to go swimming. And even during school, I did experience quite heavy, painful periods to the point where I was put on these day-long anti-inflammatories that would be the only thing that would help me stop feeling pain all day. And whether that was just my menstrual cycle settling or the beginnings of endometriosis, we'll never know. But that leads me to the end of 2003 when I was in the UK, and I was 25. I was with a boyfriend at the time. I was only a few months from coming home back to Australia. And I remember just walking along the street with him one day when I had my period and just having to stop in the street, doubled over in pain. And it was a height of pain that I hadn't experienced with my menstrual cycle before. Whether that's because I wasn't medicating, I don't know. But when I got back to Australia, I was very fortunate that the very first GP I went to was this amazing woman. I think she was actually on their medical board. She sent me straight to Dr. David Malloy, who was one of the endometriosis specialists here in Brisbane. So I was very, very fortunate that I was looked at and taken seriously straight away. So that was at the beginning of 2004, and he lined me up. I don't know, maybe it took a couple of months to see Dr. Malloy because my first laparoscopy was in October 2004 to check that I had endometriosis and excise, remove. In my paperwork, the admin couldn't find the paperwork that went back that far. But the laparoscopy, since it talks about cutting out the endometriosis, so my assumption is that's the same as it being excised rather than the ablation, the burning that is now considered not to be best practice. The excision is the best practice for removing endometriosis. So that winter, between going to see the GP when I first got back to Australia and the laparoscopy, I remember again just being curled up in a ball and in excruciating pain. And the boyfriend I came back to when I was in Australia is now my husband and father of our 2 children. So I remember saying to him, look, this condition, this endometriosis, might mean that we may not be able to have children together. Are you okay with that? I think we need to break up, because I can't process what that means for you as well as what it means for me. And thankfully he stayed. Thankfully he was like, no, I want to be with you. We can work this out together. And I was very fortunate that he did, because he's extremely supportive, and it really started to show right back in 2004. After the laparoscopy, I was diagnosed with stage 3 out of 4 endometriosis. I had my appendix removed with it, and thankfully it wasn't on my bowel, but it was very, very prevalent throughout the whole of my pelvis. And I was put on the pill because we weren't ready to start a family. The story that Malloy said was, endometriosis can be helped by pregnancy, which I see so many women turn around and go, no, it does not. And so I went on the pill for those 3 years, and in mid-2007 we decided we were ready to start a family. But I had already started to follow quite natural therapies by this point, and was like, I think, after being on the pill for a few years, I just want to give my body a chance to sort of get it out of my system, and then we'll start, trying seriously for a family. Unfortunately, after that 6 months or those few months, even we weren't not trying, but things weren't happening. And I was still quite young. I was only, what would that have been, 29. And so was my husband, and we were both quite healthy, but it wasn't happening. There was a lot happening in my career, though. I hadn't long become a team leader of 16, 17 engineers and scientists, mainly male. All the other team leaders that I was working with were all male. My manager was male. They had absolutely no idea that this was going on in my life, and there was no way I was going to share it. So needless to say, thinking that I'd done everything I could. Oh, and we had laparoscopy number 2 as soon as I came off the pill. So in mid-2007, we had a second laparoscopy for Dr. Malloy to just check how much had grown, whether I needed any more to be excised, and just to have the body ready for pregnancy. And the irony of the situation is, right back then, Malloy said to me, you're going to need IVF. And I was just flabbergasted that he would turn around and say that to me so early on. And I remember walking down the hill, and if anyone knows Brisbane at all, Malloy's offices were up on Wickham Terrace, and I walked down that hill that has the little garden through it, and just went and sat on a chair and bawled my eyes out, because I was just like devastated that he would think that women, of my age, of my health, that I would need IVF so quickly. I was like, no way, I don't need that. And he said, I have women in here and they slam their hand on the table and they tell me they demand IVF. I was like, okay, all right, that's good for them, but it's not right for me. I don't need it. And so we kept trying naturally, and then we also got engaged and we got married about 7 months later. And the whole time I was thinking, what if I'm pregnant when we get married, or what if I'm this, as you do when you're trying to conceive, you're starting to think ahead, what stage are you going to be at your pregnancy when you're doing these various different life events. And so you've kind of got this obsession in the back of your mind of when you fall pregnant, is it going to interrupt with this? Oh, I better not go on holidays because it might interrupt that. Oh, I better not book the honeymoon then because, you know, I might be pregnant because we've just, you know, we just got married. Doesn't everyone fall pregnant the night after they get married? No. My two best friends, of course, were 8 weeks pregnant at my wedding. No sign of it for us. And so I was starting to move into what I would sort of call the angry phase. By this point, it had already been about a year that we'd been trying for and nothing was happening. And it was also, you know, very stressful planning for the wedding. And just to pile things on top, because I was very ambitious in my career, I was piling things off on top of myself in that space, trying to really distract myself away from the pain of not falling pregnant. So I'd become the president of the Stallman Industry Association. I'd, you know, signed up to be on different boards at work to, you know, advise on different things. So I was filling every aspect of my life so that I didn't have to think about the fact that we weren't falling pregnant. So there was also so much anger in me that the stress of the wedding just affected how I interacted with my family as well. And there were a couple of rifts that were caused because of that. And so by the end of 2008, we moved towards the Clomid induction, so increasing the amount of eggs we produced, and did the artificial insemination where they cleaned the sperm and did like the office-based kind of turkey-based thing, just to try and really help and pinpoint exactly what was happening and remove a couple of the factors that could have been preventing it from happening naturally. So we did that for a few tries, and then I just went, okay, I need a break. And we were traveling overseas in 2009, so we did the stop thinking about it, go on holidays, and you'll fall pregnant thing. Didn't happen for us. Whenever things like that happen, so the whole, you know, everyone falls pregnant on their wedding night, everyone falls pregnant when they go on holidays, I would actually get my period in the middle of that. So I think I had my period on a wedding night, I had my period right in the middle of our European holiday. It would just like turn up early as a beautiful little surprise. So needless to say, I was getting more and more frustrated, more and more angry. And in the middle of that as well, you know, I was just starting to become more and more obsessed and looking at different avenues to support my body. I was doing acupuncture, I was trying all sorts of different supplements and herbs, and then at the end of 2009, I just went, okay, all right, I'll do IVF, but I wasn't going to do it with Dr. Malloy. If anyone knows Dr. Malloy, they know what kind of bedside manner he has. And that was not for me. I was really, really quite fragile by that point. You know, nearly, well, over 2 years in. And so I asked for a different specialist, and we found this really, really beautiful woman, Dr. Marion Nilbury. She's now retired, but she was so sweet and empathetic and really, really caring. So we did our first round of IVF in November 2009, and my husband's going to be coming in and out, by the way. So unfortunately with that cycle, we didn't even get any fertilized embryos. So that was a massive shock that you could invest so much into IVF and get absolutely nothing. So we then waited a couple more months. Everyone goes on holidays over the Christmas break. And in February 2010, we did our second IVF cycle, and we did ICSI this time. That's when the sperm is injected into the embryo, the egg rather. And I think we got 8 embryos that fertilized, and we froze all of them because I was actually, I can't remember whether it was that first round or the second round, but I was at risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So if you're at risk of that and you become pregnant, it can actually be quite deadly. So it's very dangerous. And we froze everything. So I took a month off, and we went on a road trip down to, we did the transfer in March, a month later, and then while we were on our 2-week wait, we did a road trip down to a friend's wedding, and I remember being in this field in the middle of Mount Kosciuszko, going for a bushwee in the middle of the paddock, and seeing that I was spotting. So I found out pretty quickly, before even the 2-week wait was over, that very first cycle, that very first transfer of one embryo hadn't worked. And then we had to go on to this wedding where we hardly knew anybody, and hen's day, and it was horrible, to say the least. And then we did another single transfer, and then we did a double transfer. And I think somewhere in there was a chemical pregnancy of one of those single transfers. But it became obvious that if we were to do all 8 as single transfers, it was going to be a very long, painful road. So, and because they were only I think they were like day 1 embryos that she would grow them out before she transferred them. We're not talking about day 5 blasted cysts where it was a risk of transferring that. These were 2 embryos. So that's pretty much 2010 was the year of the failed transfers, because none of them worked. And I was seeing an acupuncturist at the time, and he was the young guy taking over the business. And I remember I got a positive result on the Friday. It might have been only about 50 HCG, so not a very high result. And I must have told him that it was positive, or he found out that it was positive. So on the Monday afternoon, I had an acupuncture appointment with him, and he had a bunch of flowers there, and he was so excited for me, and he's like, "Oh, congratulations." And I had just found out that the level had started to go down, and I wasn't pregnant anymore, so it was a chemical pregnancy. And the poor guy, that was the way he learnt that not all transfers that are positive become a successful pregnancy. So there were some real highs and lows that year, and that was also the year that the GFC finally hit Brisbane, so it was a really stressful year at work. So juggling all of life and the roller coaster of that year of failed transfers was really, 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 really stressful. And I started to really assess what I could take on in life, and started to peel back the amount of hours that I was doing at work. I cut back to 32 hours, and I would have Tuesday afternoon I'd go to Pilates, Thursday morning I was going to a beautiful women's yoga class, and that's what helped me get through until we did our 3rd egg pickup at the beginning of 2011. Again, we froze everything. But this time I'd started to hear about the ability to grow the embryos to a day 5 blastocyst. I think it was, that's right, at the end of 2010, I ran into a beautiful friend of mine, and she was actually one of the first women I had speak at the Power of Story nights, and I want to get her back in to speak at these Her Story interviews. And I saw her at work, and she'd just taken about a year off work, and for her to go through her IVF cycle, but no one knew that that's what she was doing when she was taking the time off work. And she had finally fallen pregnant with twins. So hearing her story and hearing how she'd taken the time off to just completely step away from life and concentrate on herself and her IVF cycle gave me permission to go, oh, that's possible. You can actually do that. You can actually step away and give it the full attention that it needs. And so I did that myself. I lined up to be able to take 4 months off work. I was very fortunate that I was able to access long service leave, and it was the best decision I ever made. I took 4 months off from the beginning of the IVF cycle, from the transfer. So it started with a retreat. I went on this yoga retreat, and I signed up to do a painting course, a 14-week long painting course. And I asked my specialist to grow all of the embryos out so that I wasn't going to have a year of transfers of these quite young embryos. Her thinking was that the body was the best place for them to grow, but the science had advanced by that point that there was solutions that you could grow the embryos in. I don't think she had access to it. I think that was part of the problem, but I was so determined that I was not going to go through another year of failed transfers. I was like, just grow them out, put 2 back, and if the others grow to day 5, we'll refreeze them. So nothing else grew out. We transferred 2, and we had our first positive that stayed. And in that first 6 weeks, I was home. I was doing this painting course. I think we even went on a camping trip, because I remember it was about 6 weeks. I had some spotting. So thankfully, all we needed to do was increase the progesterone pessaries. I had pretty yucky morning sickness for that time, but and I was just so grateful to be home, to just try and put myself back together after what had been a very traumatic 3.5 years of all that roller coaster of emotions and trying to conceive and IVF and the failed transfers and multiple chemical pregnancies, juggling being a team leader at work in an environment that was very male dominated. I did have an IVF buddy, and it was really, really lovely to connect with her and to be able to vent with her in that year as well. So I highly, highly, highly recommend anyone who is going through IVF or even just trying to conceive naturally to have a buddy who gets it, that you can talk to. So our beautiful little Nikki was born in December 2011, and I tried to go down the hypnobirthing path, but because I had lost complete trust in my body, so every single month that we were trying, I'd be like, oh, I think this is the month, I think this is it, I think this is it, and then it wouldn't be. And so I just couldn't trust that little voice in my head that was saying, yeah, this is the one. I think because I so desperately wanted it, there would just, that desperation would override everything. So when it came to trusting my body for birth, it just wasn't there. So at the birth, I was very fortunate. It was very civilized. It was during the day, but I was not going to breathe that baby out. Like, it just wasn't going to happen. So I ended up flat on my back with a midwife on one leg, the obstetrician on the other leg, pushing for an hour and 3/4, being threatened with instrument and tearing quite badly. But Nikki came into the world healthy, happy, tiny, and gorgeous. And the first few months, the first few weeks after that weren't quite what I expected either, to be honest. So you'd think that all the gratitude in the world would override all the stress of welcoming a newborn into the world. But I think because all my energy had gone into even just conceiving a baby, I didn't have energy left to prepare for what it meant post-birth, what it meant to welcome a baby into the world. So I really struggled with that first few weeks until Nikki smiled at me for the first time and then went, okay, all right, I can do this. So what I say to women is don't feel guilty if it doesn't feel like the most amazing, trouble-free, easy time of your life, even though you've gone through this really difficult phase. The reality is matrescence, as it's called, in that 4th trimester, that it really is, that first 12 weeks after birth is really tough either way for everybody. And so we got through it, of course, and then 12 months later we thought, oh, okay, well, that took a long time the first time, so we better get started on number 2. So we did another IVF cycle just before I went back to work in early 2013, but I froze everything again because I didn't want to go through the transfer when I was settling back into work, just in case it did work. And so I think we froze everything, and it was a little while before I worked up the courage to actually do the transfer. And I think we had maybe one more chemical pregnancy. At least I know in November when we did the 3rd transfer that year, because the first 2 didn't work, it was another chemical pregnancy, and we were about to go on holidays. So this was November 2013. We had already been trying for another year, and we transferred 2, got a positive on the Monday, and then on the Wednesday the numbers were going right down again, so it was another chemical pregnancy, and that was my last day of work before going on holidays. And I remember leaving the building, receiving the phone call to go and have a lunch with my teammates, and hearing that the pregnancy wasn't viable and making that decision to swallow it and go and have lunch with my colleagues because I was about to go on holidays and I could deal with it then. I got to the point where I would wallow in my emotions. I would feel them, really, 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 really feel them. Those raw, deep, hard, sad emotions for a day. Like the big, ugly cry, like standing in the kitchen. I had to teach my husband that all he needed to do was just hold me. He didn't need to fix me. He just hold me. He'd stand in the kitchen and do this horrible, wailing, deep cry. And there was even one time when a transfer didn't work. It might have been that one, I can't remember. And we had friends coming over to visit. And they walked in the door and they knew that we'd done a transfer and I hadn't told them results yet. And it was a negative result. And they just walked in the door and I remember just like breaking down and just like falling into her arms. And my husband was standing at the top of the stairs as I was doing this, raw, deep crying. He's like, oh, what's that noise? It was just such a strange noise. So I would allow it. I just fully allow it for that day. And then I would move on a lot faster and be able to just get on with life after that. So it was a bit different for this one at the end of 2013 because everyone else had their baby number one, and baby number one was about to turn 1, and they were already falling pregnant with number 2. They had Nikki was about to turn 2, so they had their toddlers. Everyone else had either had number 2 by now or was pregnant with number 2. And it hadn't happened to us yet. We didn't have our number 2 with our toddler yet. And that pregnancy, that positive result was going to be that. And then when it didn't happen that way, again, I had to process it and try and move on, and we're about to go on holidays. But I went and visited a friend of mine a couple of days after we'd got that result that the pregnancy wasn't viable. And she didn't know anything about it. I hadn't told her anything about the IVF cycles because I needed someone who I didn't have to talk to about it. I needed normal life friends. And so I was just going about normal life, hanging out with her. She had a little boy who was her second child, about similar age to Nikki, and we were just hanging out. And then I got a phone call from a close family member telling me that they were 8 weeks pregnant with an accidental pregnancy. And it absolutely floored me. It absolutely shattered me because they were getting what I desperately wanted. They were getting a child when I so desperately wanted one myself. And I got off the phone and just broke down, and I swear my friend thought someone must have died. I was crying that rawly and that heavily. So I had to explain to her what was going on, that no one had died, but someone very close to me was pregnant when I so desperately wanted to be. So we went on our holiday, and everyone I saw, this is the cognitive bias, where you see what you so desperately want. Everyone around me was pregnant with a toddler. I saw pregnant bellies and toddlers everywhere, and but we still had an amazing holiday and came back, and that's when I decided to change specialists. So IVF cycle number 5 was with a new specialist, and she did another laparoscopy, so that was going to be laparoscopy number 5. I think I missed a couple of them in there. There were a couple more since the one in 2007. And each time didn't really show much growth of the endometriosis. And the one in 2014, when Dr. Julie Lindstrom went in there, she didn't actually find any active endometriosis. So I suddenly became unexplained infertility, which was even more frustrating because what do you do with that? And we did the IVF egg pickup cycle, and tried to grow them out to blastocysts, and we didn't get any blastocysts. So having been through what I'd been through with, almost whole years at a time of multiple transfers and of frozen embryos, and having no success, like going on that roller coaster of all these 2-week waits multiple times over, only to find out that they hadn't succeeded, to have an answer within 5 days for me, as as traumatic as it is to hear that another IVF cycle had produced absolutely nothing, to have that answer in 5 days was so much more easy to digest than having those. I think we might have had 6 embryos fertilize but no blastocysts. I would prefer to find that out in 5 days than another 10 months of roller coaster of 2-week waits. And then that was it for me. I thought that was going to be the very, 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 very last IVF cycle I was ever going to do, because I needed a break. I was exhausted, juggling, having a toddler, working, and I had new dreams for my career as well. I'd since done my certification in coaching. I'd stepped down from being a team leader and moved into the team, but still had a senior officer kind of role where I was doing a lot of client relationship management and really enjoying the people development side of my job, and decided to set up a coaching and facilitation business at that point and got that going. So that was then my focus for almost 2 years, until in 2015 my cycle started going really haywire again. I started to get a lot of breakthrough bleeding during the month, and by the end of 2015 I was lucky to have 8 to 10 days in my 24 to 26 day long cycle where I wasn't spotting or bleeding. It wasn't a good quality of life, I can tell you. And I was trying various different therapies. Nothing was really working. So I went back to Dr. Julie Lindstrom at the end of 2015 and just went, right, my cycle is an absolute nightmare. I'm pretty ready to end it, but I know I won't forgive myself if I don't do one last round of IVF before we get serious about what we're going to do about my cycle. And so we did an MRI and discovered that I also had adenomyosis. So thankfully, when I had adenomyosis, I didn't have the pain with it. I've been getting regular acupuncture for the last many years, but I was going to Dr. Kirsty Eng at Kirsty Infertility, and getting acupuncture at least once a month, and that was what was keeping the endometriosis and the pain at bay. 2015, I did a lot of Bowen therapy, and so I said, okay, all right, we're going in for another IVF cycle. So adenomyosis was diagnosed, and she said, okay, we're going to have to shut this down. So we're going to put you on Zoladex for 3 months. Basically made me artificially menopausal. So over the summer of 15-16 here in Brisbane, subtropical, humid, hot, heat wave Brisbane, I was launched into artificial menopause, and it was disgusting. So I actually went on HRT for that month as well to just try and get through it. Because on top of everything else, knowing I was going into another IVF cycle, I did not want to deal with the hot flushes and the psycho moods that a really fast onset of artificial menopause brought with it. And I also did a past life regression at that point with my acupuncturist, Kirsty. And that was a real turning point for me mentally and emotionally as well, because after decided to do this last IVF cycle, this cycle number 6, I was terrified that I was really pushing for something to happen that wasn't meant to happen. And so I was terrified that something really bad was going to happen. So there was so much fear. And I wanted something strong and powerful that would help clear that. And I knew hypnotherapy was really, really powerful. So I did this past life regression with Kirsty. And the lives that we saw really told a story of why I was so scared. And came out of that hypnosis, that process, accepting that what will be will be. And so we did the cycle in February 2016, And this time round, we threw absolutely everything at it. I was on human growth hormone. We did the scratch, we did the Leopardol flush. We even did a special trigger where I could still create or transfer a fresh blastocyst without being hyperstimulated. So she shut me down and triggered me at the same time. That's science for you. And we did get a blastocyst, and we transferred that blastocyst, went on camp trip again with Nikki down to beautiful, beautiful northern New South Wales area. And it was on our last day of camping when we were driving back that I started spotting about 10 days into the 2-week wait. And so understandably, I was absolutely devastated. And so that was on the Tuesday. We were supposed to get the blood test on the Friday, which was the end of the 2-week wait. And I went in for a blood test on the Wednesday morning, and my HCG was 4. It wasn't even 0, it was 4, which is the worst because you don't even have a definite no. It's a, oh, sorry, we don't have a definite answer. So you've got to stay on the progesterone pessaries, as horrible as they are, until we have a definite answer. And I was just like, oh my God, just keep it going, why don't you? And I went to my kinesiologist and just said, I can't deal with this, I can't. And it was supposed to be just to help me get through the 2-week wait, and it turned into a session all around not knowing and coping with not knowing the answers. And so that was a real lesson in letting go. And I tell you, it's still a practice for me, but I really had to just, and it wasn't a learn how to be apathetic, kind of don't care. It was a care, but let it go, accept that you're not going to know everything in life. And that's really, really, really hard. And, you know, it had been many, many, many years at this point where there were so many unknowns and so many moments of waiting. And it was just like this final blow of going, okay, it's a 4 HCG. So technically it's positive, but it's so low that it's not viable, but you have to hang in until it goes down to 0. And yeah, it was a pretty rough moment for us. But having said that, because we knew that it was the very, very, very last IVF cycle that we were ever going to do, there was this relief and this freedom that came with that. And so I processed the grief as I explained. I'd let it, I'd feel it, I'd let it flow through me, I'd express it. And then we actually enjoyed the freedom that came from knowing that we were never, ever, 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 ever going to do IVF ever again. And because of all those medical interventions, because of all the work that we'd done in the lead up, we actually conceived naturally for the first time in 9 years the very next month. Like when we went in for the WTF appointment with Dr. Julie, we'd actually conceived that week. And she sat at her desk and she said to me, now it's my job as your specialist to say to you, I have left no stone unturned. She was basically saying there's nothing more she can do, and for me to just, it was time to walk away and accept that we were not going to have a second child. So I was like, that's totally cool. Didn't know we were pregnant at this point. Would never have thought that was even a possibility because we'd never fall pregnant naturally and never have again. And so it's needless to say, it was a little bit of a surprise when I kind of got up to about day 29 of my cycle. And as I said, I'm normally like a 24, 25, 26 day cycle. I was like, even got out all the IVF paperwork to have a look at when my cycle would start again after my egg pickups last time. I was like, oh yeah, they're normally a little bit longer. Maybe not normally this long. And I was at work, and was working in a different area. I'd lined up a job to work in a different area, and I'd taken about 2 or 3 weeks off to do that IVF cycle. I'd got to that point with managing my mental health of my IVF cycles that I would take the 2 weeks off for the egg pickup, and even the 2 weeks off for the egg transfer, because I just knew I needed to concentrate on myself, on my mental health and my emotional well-being during those times. And I was at work, and I was terrified that any minute I was just going to get this really heavy period because it hadn't come, and there wasn't even any spotting that I would normally get. And so I left work at about lunchtime, and I bought a pregnancy test on the way home, and I had to wait till I needed to go to the toilet again, which was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And when I finally peed on the stick, it was pregnant straight away. I think that was day 30 of what we're doing my cycle. So it was a complete and utter shock. I called my husband, and I think he came home from work straight away because he was just as surprised and shocked as well. And it was the most robust pregnancy. And across the road, a private midwife, home birth clinic had set up. It was just like this crazy window of time that she was across the road perfectly for when we needed her. I even had, a chiropractor across the road for me. So that's the full story of our 2 little miracles. Nikki's a miracle because she was the only embryo out of all 6 IVF egg pickup cycles that became a viable pregnancy and a live birth. And Richie, who was born in December 2016, was the only natural conception we've ever had. Like, what are we, January 2022, and I haven't been on contraception since July 2007, because we don't need it. So in that time, needless to say, I picked up a lot of life lessons. And in 2018, January 2018, I was doing a course for myself, and came up with the idea that I dropped in through meditation that I actually wanted to work with women on their fertility journey, because I knew how traumatic the whole process is. It really does affect your mental health and emotional well-being, sometimes in ways that you don't quite realize until afterwards. And so the clients that I see now, so I did set up that Bekinda To Yourself Therapies, and which is a play on my name. Before we knew we were pregnant with Richie, I went, okay, we haven't fallen pregnant, we're only having one child, so I'm going to really get serious about setting up my own practice to be able to work with people personally through my coaching. And I happened to see that I mistyped my name this one day, and you'll see on your keyboard L and K are right beside each other, and it came up Bekinda, and I was like, oh, Bekinda To Yourself Therapies, that's a beautiful name for practice. And I created the Facebook page all the way back in April 2016. Needless to say, it went on hold for a couple of years until we got through the pregnancy and the early years of Richie's life. And now I have this amazing practice supporting women who have women's health conditions and are dealing with the stress and anxiety of that. And it's what I'm seeing with a lot of women is that they get through the trying to conceive, whether they've got PCOS, endometriosis, adenomyosis, etc. And they'll get through it. They'll get through the first year or so of having their children, and then they realize that the endometriosis, the PCOS, is still there. It's still there with a vengeance, but they're also now dealing with children. So what I help them with is to be able to be content in their worlds, to be able to deal with all of that, because it's really hard, and particularly if you haven't dealt with the trauma of having gone through fertility issues, and even the trauma of having those women's health conditions. It can really play out in insidious ways where you might feel like you're self-sabotaging, you might feel really overwhelmed, you're not coping, you're stuck in a rut, you just want to escape family life, you're not prioritizing your own health, you feel guilty when you do. So these are the things that women are coming to me with now, and I can use my life experience, my hypnotherapy, my NLP, my coaching training, my additional training that I've done and readings to really help these women bring some joy back into their lives and find contentment, and to learn how to prioritize themselves without feeling guilty about that. And it's such a huge rewarding shift for everyone, and it means that everyone in the family benefits as well. We all know, and those of us who are mums, we know how much our children feed off our energy and our moods. So when we make that shift to look after ourselves, it plays out and there's a ripple effect across the whole family. So I'm so honoured to be able to work with these women and support them to do that now. And every step along the way has been more and more healing for me as well. Whilst, you know, IVF wouldn't be classed as the big T trauma for some people, all those, each month, those failures chips away at you and can really feel like quite deep pain, emotional and mental health issues can really develop from that. And, you know, there was a lot of obsessing, there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of coping, not coping, that I've had to rebuild myself from, and that's what I help women do now. So I hope there was some moments in there that you could relate to and help you feel less alone on your own women's health or fertility journey. And if you've got any questions, I can see there's quite a lot of comments here. So I will come back in and I will reply to those as much as I can. And thank you, Sharon. There's some beautiful comments there. And I will, as I said, I'll be in the group. So please, any questions, let me know. And if you have a story yourself that you think other women would benefit from hearing, your own herstory, I would love to interview you. So the next personal story interview will be the first Tuesday of March. So please let me know if you would love to share your women's health journey, either through fertility, endometriosis, PCOS, PMDD, adenomyosis. I think any of those chronic sort of health conditions that interact, and a lot of them, you know, you don't get just one. A lot of the times, a lot of women I know also have Hashimoto's or celiac disease or Crohn's disease. So yeah, let me know and we'll have a chat and share with the women in this community. So bye for now. I'm going to get my children off screens. That's how we're getting through the delayed start to school when I've committed to this today. And I will see you all soon. Bye.